Well, listeners, this is Jeff Miller, your host, and you're on Destination Aviation, your source for aviation, everything. Aviation news, enthusiasm in aviation, whatever you want. People ask me all the time, what are the episodes going to be like, Jeff? Are you going to be you? Are you going to be other people? I'm like, whatever I choose at that time. But today we have a very good interview with some folks that we're going to talk about here in a second. So thank you for tuning in to hear. This will be dropping, I believe, right on the 4th of July or right after the 4th of July. But either way, happy 4th of July to our listeners in the United States. I probably saw on any of our Instagram, TikTok stuff, we had some fireworks at the airport I work at. It's a really good firework display that's put on by the community, so I usually get my fix the weekend before the 4th of July, but I will be marching in a parade tomorrow, so fun times there. We will get right into the interview today, and then finish up with some notes. I will be traveling on vacation. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the show, but I want to introduce, NATA, the National Air Transportation Association. We have two special folks with us today. One is Jenny Ann Urban, and the other is Randy Deberry. And we're going to have a conversation on all things that NATA is doing, their mission, their goal, and what they see the future looking like. So we'll jump right into the interview here, and at the end, we will follow up with some show notes. Well, welcome to Destination Aviation to both Jenny Ann Urban and Randy Deberry. Jenny, Randy, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
No, it's fantastic. I appreciate you reaching out. I know, Randy, we haven't had the pleasure, of meeting in person, but Jenny, I know we've met once, in Nashville. And is it your hometown or is it your transplant town?
Transplant town, but now hometown. We'll just go with it. So.
Hometown's good. So are you actually you're from the South, right? So
yes.
Nearest to Nashville?
Yeah, Nashville had, I wanted to stay, close to family, but Nashville had a decent-sized airport, which I do love me some B&A airport. They have live music in the airport, which is great. We're now getting some more international flights, and it was better than driving, 2-lane roads to some of the other airports that I needed to. But,
Yeah, and the funny thing about it, too, is you see some pretty big names in there. I think I saw Keith Urban was playing in, the hall. Most airports you get some random band, but you guys actually put some pretty good artists in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good people watching, too. So.
Airports are fantastic for that. And Randy, are you a native of Nashville as well?
Well, I was born and raised about 60 miles outside of Nashville as a young man over in Franklin, Kentucky. So the accent a little bit, some people have a hard time understanding me. So I'll tend to enunciate my words a little better. But joined the Air Force in 1980 and landed in South Carolina and spent 21 years in the Air Force. Charleston, I call home. Been here since 1980, plan to never leave. And live right outside Charlotte in the upstate near Lake Wylie.
Oh, that's great. So now I've learned something too. I thought you were in Nashville as well, but you're in North Carolina. Did I hear that correctly?
Oh,
South Carolina. How dare I say North Carolina? South Carolina.
South Carolina, yes, sir.
Well, that's great. And you both work. Now, I'll be the first to admit this because we have listeners that aren't always necessarily a part of aviation. So I'll be the first to say I at one point said NATA. I think I was corrected. I think it's NATA. I've also heard NATA. What's the correct way to say it?
You can say it any of those ways would be fine. I think all of us say it a little differently due to our accents, but I say NATA, the National Air Transportation Association. We started kind of making that change to NATA a little bit because we are doing a little bit international work as well. So...
No, that's great. And so both of you, I know, Randy, you spoke kind of briefly about your past, but do you want to just for the listeners up front kind of explain your journey? I don't know, Randy, Jenny, I'll let you decide who wants to go first to get you to NATA, NATA.
I'm probably the most long-winded here. So I've been working, I retired out of the Air Force and then I went to work in an engineering firm as a engineer and worked there. Because I'm an airframe power plant guy, jet mechanic, and that's what I did most of my career. Did instructional system design as an instructor on the C-17. Spent a lot of time overseas, working special operations, and so the retirement day came, And so I retired and spent 3 years in industry. And then the FAA called me. And please, I hope your listeners don't hang up.
Oh no, so far, you know what? I think the thing here is people enjoy the journey. They kind of, unlike other podcasts I hear in aviation, I like to try to understand kind of the human side to it. That's what I try to do in my own career. So I think people actually really enjoy that because sometimes, especially in our industry, right? I don't want to say it seems robotic, but there's kind of this polished version, right? I'm Jeff Miller and I went to this school and I did this and I did that. And at the end of the day, we're all humans working in a very technical industry, but I think people love to see kind of that inside
It
perspective.
is.
Yeah.
And, so I went into the Federal Aviation Administration. A lot of people thought it was the future farmers, but being from Kentucky, I could assume that they thought that was probably true. But it is the Federal Aviation. It's a line of business under the Department of Transportation. And went to Orlando as a general aviation inspector. GS9 coming out, and I, so I spent 3.5 years in the Orlando area. It was a huge experience for me because coming out of the military and under so much structure and safety, and I'm not saying that it wasn't. It's just different, because being in the military, it's nonprofit, right? You work, train, 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 train. But being in general aviation is an amazing journey, and I will tell you, after spending 3.5 years or so down in the Orlando area, I brought my wife back to Charlotte because she's retired Air Force as well, and because her father had cancer, and so we came back home, and I went to Charlotte, North Carolina, as a general aviation inspector there too. Two quite diverse places, right? Still general aviation, and the struggles of 135 and 145 are real, no matter where you go. And stayed in Charlotte for a couple years as a field inspector, and then luckily I got promoted. I don't know if that's luck or stupidity on my part, but I really wanted to make a difference, and I think you can not be a potted plant and just come to work and do your job and go home. But that's not me. So I'm all about change. I'm all about trying to reinvent myself and help an industry, because you hear how I would go out and do inspections, and I'd walk in and they go, "Well, welcome. What set of manuals do you want?"
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll say, some of your examples of being a potted plant, I could see where people would say maybe future farmers of America.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. You
absolutely.
just mix it all together. You had to deal with crap too, and I feel like farmer has to deal with crap, right?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. And I walked in a bunch of that as well. But I will say that, and then I worked air carrier, Mountain Air Cargo, FedEx feeder, so 121, 135, and but general aviation is really where my heart's at, and I love 135 operators. Right?
Right.
There's about 2,000 of them out there, and it's somehow or another we have to build this collective voice for change, because all of the struggles, they all suffer from oversight, surveillance, certification, more oversight, more regulations, and everybody seems to want to put their hand in their pocket. So the margins of operation is getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And Jenny Ann and I talk about this all the time, and her heart is probably larger than mine. She's been doing aviation. She's an aviation girl, right? Attorney. So she knows, and I will say, I know what it's like to be hungry, and I never forgot what that's like, and I know what it's like. And most operators, all operators, don't worry about last week's revenue. They want to know what next week's revenue is going to be, because that's how they keep their families employed and fed and insurance paid. Charter companies just keep rolling down the road. And, so part of what Jenny and I, our vision is to continue to build that collective voice where we're not just representing 200, we're representing 2,000. Because I used to tell people, you come to my office and knock on the door and you have a problem, I'm going to listen, but it's just one person. But when you got 2,000 people coming to knock on my door and you all have a problem that's systemic or there's continuity in it, now I'm really going to have to listen and really change this because it's impacting the whole industry. And general aviation, in my opinion, is the largest user of the NAS. They employ thousands and thousands of people across the United States, buy the fuel, rent the hangars, so they contribute a tremendous amount of love and labor into the NAS, into the airports, into the runways, and paying taxes and providing jobs. And that's where my heart's at, and it's just a void that I just can't seem to get filled. And maybe it's just blind passion, but I think that you just got to fall forward in life sometimes and just keep doing what you feel is best to do.
Well, I think we're all lucky that you went into aviation and not into the farm industry, and then now you're working with Jenny. And Jenny, I know Randy touched on it, but you are an attorney. Is that correct? Yeah. You are.
Yes.
And what brought you to NATA?
Well, I guess I could give a little bit of my background too.
Yeah.
It's been quite an odd journey, as Randy mentioned. I feel like most of us in aviation say that.
We all do, right? It happens.
But, I was getting my MBA and I was babysitting for professors. We could all use a little extra money while in college. And there was a lady that was in charge of the LLM program at Ole Miss, hottie toddy, Had to put that in there. I got 4 degrees back there. I love me some Ole Miss Rebels. I just kept staying for more football seasons, hoping we get better, and now we're finally good. But she actually was, the head of the LLM and Air and Space Law, but she also went around and helped other countries revise their laws. And so I actually became her travel nanny. And her name is Jackie Sorrell. She worked for the FAA, and when we would be out, in the Philippines working. She would, and I'd have little Ellie Bell, who's no longer 2, she's now 16, was at night she'd go to bed early, and so I'd help Jackie on the side, and that's how I got interested in aviation. So it was something a little strange that I knew Ole Miss had the LLM program, went into private practice at 2 international law firms, and did a lot of work across the board, whether it be with OEMs, 121s, 135s. And then I ended up, at one point going overseas to the Middle East. And so I was living in Dubai, but working most of the time in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, advising on regulations there and, some air traffic and network development. They have, obviously, as we know, they're growing in that airspace. It can be quite complex. So that was really interesting, but decided I wanted to get home and get my butt to Nashville. So I was over there. And I came to NATA. I was looking at it. I'd heard of NATA in the past and was aware of a few of the colleagues that had been there for a while. And so I said, let's look at this role. And I was really fortunate to come in and start off my journey as the managing director of air charter and maintenance, really getting to work with the 135 side. And while I love my 121 carriers, 135, like Randy said, is so much fun. It's never a dull day. They definitely keep me on my toes. But I love that it really brings out the different personalities. You're really getting to work with, whether it be the head of the company that's also working as a chief pilot or that's doing this, or small operators, large operators, Alaska to Charlotte, all these different complex matters, and then really being able to advocate on their behalf. And then, of course, we do represent the airports, as you know, the FBOs, fuel providers, AAM companies. But, I had started out in that role with air charter maintenance, and now I'm the vice president of regulatory affairs. I will say I'm not acting in a legal capacity, but my legal background as an attorney definitely helps in that role. And it's been really fun getting to work with the different agencies, and as we see new heads of agencies get confirmed, which we'll see what happens this upcoming Wednesday with Bedford, looking to see there. I think getting permanent people in place will really help the agencies continue to advance policies and move forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I know a lot of people that listen to the podcast, they're in the industry, but there's also a lot that are not. And so if you look at past episodes, we've talked about, these regulations, and we refer to them as, numbers and digits as they fall into the regulations, 121, 135. But so for people that aren't necessarily completely involved in aviation or immersed into it, can you, either yourself or Randy, just kind of briefly describe your mission and goal there as it relates to, I mean, you're focusing, and I'll start by saying the 135, 141 operators, but not so much 121 is what I think I understand, but can you maybe just explain briefly to someone who doesn't know exactly what that is, what you guys are actually advocating for?
Yes. So go ahead, Randy, if you want to.
Well, I needed to go back just a little bit. So how
Sure.
I got involved with NATA. In 2016, I became the office manager in the Columbia, South Carolina Flight Standards District Office, which is a general aviation, which there's CFR Part 135 charter operators, and you have 9 passengers or less, or 10 or more passengers, depending upon the size and scope of the aircraft. But how I came to be aware of NATA is that when I was going out and doing my quarterly site visits, I called it a "how goes it," right? And
Right.
so really, it was like, "How's it going?"
Yeah.
And at first, they were shocked that the office manager was even in their building. And I said, "No, I'm real. I'm here. Tell me what you're concerned about." So, in going around the state of South Carolina and meeting with all the different operators and stakeholders, it became abundantly clear to me that there was a consistent message, and it was part of the illegal charters. And so I was like, illegal charters? Well, we're just going to make that stop. We're going to end that today. Well, that was a dream, but came true partially. We're getting better at that. And so that's how I come to know NATA. And so I invited that organization in to support us from an industry level. Right. So they came, and we have now, I believe, through all of our efforts, and I've retired from the FAA, I think we've reached between 12 and 16 million people worldwide with our educational outreach, but there's still more work to be done. So that's how after I retired, I was poor and desolate, and I needed a job. So so NATA gave me a breadbasket and brought me in.
You didn't want to babysit like Jenny was?
Yeah.
Jenny was?
Yeah,
or...
no, probably her babysitting me. But no, I believe what they do. I believe that we can get better as an organization, and all organizations, when it comes to combating the reasons that 135 operators struggle, right? Because they're doing it right. And I don't know if you're aware of how much the cost for a certification process to go through. It could be anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000, and a tremendous wait long list to get certified.
And that's for the company itself.
The company, the operator.
Get the 135 operational certificate or the 145 operational. And when I know that you had asked also about the numbers. So 135, when we're saying that, is air charter. We say 145, we're talking about maintenance and repair, MROs. 121 is the ones that we don't deal with as much. We do work with them, not the airlines per se. But, sometimes there's different collaborative efforts where all the associations in DC come together, such as, on some safety letters or something like that, coalition letters to try and illustrate, as Randy said, having the voice of everybody come forward. But 121 is the airlines. So no, we're primarily general aviation, business aviation, more air charters than 91 operations. That we do touch a little bit on that, but I would say not as much. And then, we work collaboratively with other associations that do touch on some of those areas. Because having we have over 3,700 members across the aviation ecosystem. There's always differing opinions, but just looking out for what's best for the overall aviation ecosystem is something that NATA really stands on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, I know we have all these numbers, and just so quickly, so people know, 91, and I mean, I understand what it is, but in your mind, 91, just for the listeners.
Randy, you want to explain that one?
Yeah, Part 91 is just it could be corporate or it could just be general aviation. It's not really, it doesn't have to go through the certification processes to haul passengers or to provide charter transportation. So it's just your everyday Part 91 operators, and they're free to fly pretty much much as they wish without much or little oversight, from the FAA, where it's not a stringent certification process to which we hold, stakeholders or operators or repair stations and likes of that.
That's what Jeff Miller flies under. So what Randy's saying, when you fly with me, be careful. I am not as regulated.
We love our 91s too. Don't worry.
We do.
That they're not as safe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm flying, but you're flying more for personal use or business use.
Right.
And you're not putting the flying public on board.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. Not for hire. Correct.
Not for hire.
You are not paying Jeff Miller fly, and at the end of the day, this is all federal aviation regulation, correct? So far, for aims, and where just at some point when the regulation was written, that was the number that was available within the document, correct?
Yes. So we had to start at one, and we're working our way up.
Right. Well, because if you've been in this industry long enough, I believe back Part 107 was security back in the day, right before the Department of Homeland Security was formed in TSA. But now it is UAS. I think they reused that regulation.
Man.
And they're supposed to be possibly next week. I don't want to say for sure because I don't know when this episode will come out, but Part 108 may be dropping for AAM. So then keep an eye out for that number. Okay. Well, that'll be the proposed regulations coming in. But yeah, I was like, wait, you're going to mess up my numbers with this. We're finally coming down. Or, the FAA loves their acronyms as well. And so keeping up with those can be quite difficult. So if we do say anything that is an acronym, please let us know. We'll make sure we explain it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that is, especially, I don't want to say a barrier into our field, but I think it just makes us feel special when we just throw out an acronym sometimes. Because this, and this. And obviously us that work in it, it makes a lot of sense. But sometimes people are like, well, wait a second, what is that number? So I appreciate you guys explaining that mission. Now, you guys both work together. How long have you worked together now at NATA?
It feels like years. Now it's been since February.
Wow, so really not that long.
Yeah, so I retired last year. And, I took a little break, and this opportunity presented itself, and I still have the same passion and the desire to support 135, 145. I have the desire that I had while I was in the FAA as a manager, as an inspector, to ensure, to play my part, that industry is successful.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I would say I was so lucky to bring Randy on board as my senior technical advisor because, while I do have a lot of the technical, knowledge, I always hate lawyers that come in and just say, this is how we're going to do it. Let's just do the pen, and not actually have been even within an operation or understanding. And, that's one thing that I value is going out and actually seeing our members' operations. When I say members, those are NATA members. So if I say clients, that's just the lawyer and me still going back to it. But they join our association to, get the advocacy, get the educational tools. They get a lot of different valuable resources when they're a NATA member. But, Randy being able to come in from the FAA, him and I, we play devil's advocate. Sometimes people probably think we're arguing, but we're not. It's great. We go back and forth. And like Randy said, it's only been since February, but it feels like forever. But having that connection and being able to work together hand in hand on every project, I've seen so much value in. I do recommend law firms look at getting senior technical experts because it's a huge asset to have as we're going through, and also to, sometimes understand maybe something that a member is saying that, I might be thinking only regulatory and I'm not thinking operational. And then being able to put those two together, and then same with Randy, whereas I'm like, hey, this is the regulation. How do we advise them on what's working and what's not? And a lot of times I've seen within the agencies, them not understanding how it might actually play out in the field. And that's been a key area where we've been collaborating with, whether it be TSA or the FAA on those notes.
I would say that, to Jenny's point, we take on a voice of reason and helping to find that gray area, because in the rule it says shall not and will not. Well, that's clear to me. You shall not do that. You will not do that. But in between, there's a whole lot of gray area, right? And that's where you make money, and that's how you get change done. And those are your boundaries, right, with the rule. And what we try to do is help define that gray area clarification up the chain of command, within the flight standards and FAA, DOT, and then parlay that into support for our NATA members.
No, absolutely. And for the listeners in there, Randy has a beautiful old clock behind him, and we said that when it strikes, that's when he was going to stop talking, and Jenny would take over. So that really worked out kind of perfectly.
I was like, Randy, get your clock on par.
Come on. What is out of the old shows where they had the boom at the end when they, all right, time to move along. No, that's great though. So the episode here. Now I know Jenny, you mentioned this. My full intention is to try to get it out today, tomorrow. So hopefully that will be your sneak peek to the 108. But along with that, I did just record an episode, which working with them to get it published with NBAA. So the listeners haven't heard that yet, but that's a National Business Aviation Association. So again, acronyms, and we have a lot of these advocacy groups within aviation. But could you kind of explain, NATA's role to maybe like NBAA, AAE, ACI, GAMI, everybody that's kind of working towards something. But what in particular, I know you touched on it a little bit, but what would you say is maybe, in my mind, that differentiates you potentially from like an NBAA, and NATA has been brought up, or NATA brought up to serve a purpose, but what do you kind of serve as that niche from these other groups that are advocating as well?
Absolutely. So, we do, as I mentioned, work hand in hand. I know some people see us as competitors, and some days we might see each other as competitors, and sometimes not. A lot of times we actually share a lot of members. But I will say that there is a Association of Regulatory VPs group message that's always going, and I love the gentlemen and ladies over at the other associations, and really us being able to provide background. One difference is I know that NBAA represents a lot of the 91 operators, and so that's a little bit different. One of our focuses is really being the voice of air charter, the FBOs, and then, of course, the airports, in general aviation across the spectrum. We do work very closely with AAAE and ACI, with the airport interests, and then working with GAMA, the General Aviation Manufacturers Association. Sometimes people use aviation, some use aerospace. So if I mess that up, sorry guys, love it. But the working with them, and we do have manufacturers that are also members of NATA, but across the board, ensuring that business aviation is really represented on the legislative and regulatory fronts. I would say we also provide a unique platform called Safety First. It's a training program, and it does a lot of the ground operations, safety measures, preventing misfueling, which is a huge area. And then that communications piece between the people, working in ground services and the air charter operators, and ensuring the pilots are, if they're fueling, they're saying the exact numbers. We don't want to leave any room for estimates. We don't want to leave, and just those, what some in the industry might consider a basic concept, but those reminders and those training is so key to ensure safety at all levels of the operation.
No, absolutely. Anything you want to add to that, Randy?
Do I have anything to add to what she said? No, she answered.
Okay. It was a very good answer. I will say I've done a little more. I love your programs at NATA, and you've been, all of you, very welcoming whenever. Myself, my day job, I'm an airport operator. And so we've been a member of NATA for a long time at this airport. And so what I see, though, that and you can correct me here because this is just my perspective, kind of getting into your organization, is that there is a focus on the fixed base operators and kind of a voice for them. And I do see, there a lot of advocacy there that I haven't seen necessarily with other groups, and nothing against other groups. That's how I've kind of have seen it when I come to your meetings. I don't know, is that an accurate statement? Is that, Jeff, you're full of crap? You should be working for the farmers.
No, and I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, for transparency and for us to be able to parlay that into something that is critical, right? We're all in this together. Airports, FBOs, fuel, and the operators, because one doesn't exist without the other.
Absolutely.
So they are a family.
Yeah.
And so, we recognize that. The CEO and President, Kurt Costanza, recognizes that. And so he's tasked Jenny and I this year to put together a plan that will help change that perception. If that is a perception, I think, and if that's your perception, then it becomes your truth. But we have close to over 250, close to probably 300, 135 charter operators. And we recognize, and the president recognizes, that we need to be a larger voice for all and not have that perception, as you stated, that is focused heavily on fuel or airports or FBOs, because, he said one doesn't exist without the other. So, as part of his strategic initiative, Jenny and I was working on this, which Kurt pulled us and set us down and talked to us and told us this is his vision, and so help him come up with the mission around that. And so that's part of his initiatives moving forward, because he recognized that that was one of the areas that we needed to continue to support and grow the collective family for the good of all.
And that won't mainly be out FBOs or airports. We're still going to completely be advocating on all that. But it's great to hear also the different voices between them, because, not everyone always agrees on things.
Right.
And so being able to see what's going to be best, as Randy said, they all need to work together within the aviation ecosystem. And then, of course, every sector has their own, issues or matters or agenda items. And, one that came up that was interesting, that was a huge win that we worked on for the 135 air charter operators recently was, and I'm going to try not to use acronyms, but so it was in regards to APHIS, which was the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services. And they, we advocated for them to maintain this small aircraft exemption for the user fees. And that was in regards to the agriculture and quarantine inspection. And this would have been, when they're come back in, it always had an exemption for small aircraft. These operators usually are operating at about a 3% profit margin and keeping their doors open. And so that was really key, that fee, especially for operators that do back and forth like Canada, back and forth, it was going to have a huge impact on their business. And they actually came out and they said they are going to keep the small aircraft exemption. But that, if that would have put out of business a couple operators, then the FBO loses business, the airport loses business. So keeping that, we had an airport come to us and say, can you guys help on this too? I said, don't worry, I'm already working on it with this. And so that was a huge win, but it showed that it might be a focus of one area, but how that can trickle down the pipeline to the other areas of the ecosystem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I, for people listening, with the APHIS inspection, under Customs and Border Protection, right, international flight, coming back into the United States, getting cleared, and they're looking for things like invasive species, if you're bringing back whatever horticultural stuff in an aircraft, right? That's what that inspection process really is, correct?
Yep. And so, it's, you really got to look at what's going to be, the risk, and also the, of what's going to be on the plane. Obviously, if they were bringing certain things in, they would need to go through a process. But, if it's back and forth and it's really not, bringing in agricultural items, then you don't need as much. I'm being careful with what I say, people might be bringing it in not, so.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because I've worked, the airport I work at now, at Chicago Executive, we have a user fee airport with Customs and Border Protection. And one, I love the advocacy that you guys have there for operators. Two, even with the FBO side to it, they need a voice, absolutely. And when I, coming into this, right, because we, as an airport operator, the same as you, right, we deal with all of them. And, more recently, I've been working with AOPA, or Aircraft Owner and Pilots Association, and, kind of their mission and what they're looking to do. But, Randy, to your points, we all work together, and one doesn't work without the other. If there's no airplanes, there's no reason to have an airport. If there's no airport, well, can't really do much with your airplanes. So, but, it's interesting on the customs side to this, because it's such, that organization itself can be very siloed sometimes, and working through a lot of these processes. Because even here as an airport operator, when we look at the billings, I saw a lot of APHIS inspections, and so I asked, I was like, why, at our airport like this, we're not running cargo. So I'm like, what's really happening here? And, the explanation that I got is, well, we have to fill, so APHIS runs, from what I was told, the United States Department of Agriculture. So back to the Future Farmers of America, they always seem to be gravitating back to this conversation, but they would sit down and say, well, we need to fill that budgetary bucket. So maybe if an aircraft doesn't even have an inspection, we're going to say it did, so it puts money into that bucket. So even like on the billing side on ours, I'm like, well, that doesn't really seem like, I'm not a financial wizard, but I get propping up, a budget line item, but it's also kind of weird that if there actually wasn't an APHIS inspection to categorize it as it. So I love that there's groups like yours that are, advocating, getting into it and trying to make it better for the end user, because it is so important. So,
Absolutely. And I mean,
yeah,
you did say something as well too, is it's these agencies, sometimes they don't always realize how they are impacting aviation. I mean, everyone thinks FAA, TSA, and then,
right.
what those of us in the industry know CBP, as well as, the FCC, um, and spectrum conversation, satellite, GPS, and then PHMSA, the pipeline and hazardous materials. I'm getting it, I
Right,
go,
yeah. There's so
there's
many of them, right?
but that has to do with a lot of the cargo that can be carried on
Yeah.
some of these aircraft or some of the different aspects. And so ensuring that we're working with all the different agencies is one of the priorities I put in as when I came on to lead our regulatory affairs, is making sure that any agencies that touch aviation that we at least try to engage with, because we found also that a lot of them might work more with the airliners, but let them know what's going on in general aviation and how, we can be a huge asset to them educational wise. And I know that a lot of our members, I'm sure like you would be always happy to talk and educate them on certain aspects of where their regulations might be having a either positive or negative impact on the industry.
So that being said, I know you mentioned early on the topic of illegal charters, and I know that that's something that it seems like with NATA has, I guess maybe if that's one of your cornerstones of advocacy and what you're really doing, or talk about that directly, or one of a bunch of advocacies. But for the listeners, maybe kind of explain what that really means. And we talked about all the alphabet, but I'm assuming illegal charters across all spectrum, but predominantly within the 135. It doesn't 91. I guess in theory, if you're a legal charter, you're flying 91, probably posing as their 135. What are your opinions on that?
Well, this is Randy's passion project, not flying illegal charters. Let me just say, he's not passionate about flying them. He's very passionate about combating them, which has been something that NATA has taken a lead on. And I'm going to turn over to Randy in just a second. But one thing we have been working on with the FAA is combating this. We have been assisting the FAA in getting illegal charters reported to their hotline. But as Randy worked on it, not just with NATA, and that he's really helping our 135 operators report this, because this is what can be putting, some of the people out of business if they can be going, flying cheaper but not flying under the right regulations. But Randy also investigated it while at the FAA. So when we talk about an illegal charter or combating illegal charter expert, Randy's the one. So Randy, I'll let you.
Well, yeah, you can call it uncertified charters, illegal charters. Well, I always compared it to if it's not legal, then what is it? It's illegal, right? So it is a problem, and it's an issue not only in the United States but around the world. It just doesn't happen in the United States, so we're not, the rest of the world is not immune to it. And the tragedies that I've seen are far too many. I've been out to way too many accidents where there happened to be children on board, and that really, you never recover from that. And, some would argue that the safety margins in uncertified charters, there's no data and facts there to support, but it's much bigger than that. And I can tell you that I've investigated illegal operations where the pilot was allegedly using drugs, which in certified charter operations, they have a drug and alcohol program. You got rest requirements and sleep requirements. I investigated one case where there was a pilot that was flying the majority of the 30,000 flights over a period of 2 or 3 years. Now, you start putting that in perspective on how many hours and how many flights that you, as a single pilot operator, are flying, because it was a single pilot operation, and most people wanted the second pilot because it made them feel good. In some cases, they weren't even rated or qualified to fly that airplane, but it made them feel good because there was two pilots in the front. But and then you start looking at sleep deprivation and possibility of drugs and alcohol and stuff. So it lends to an unsafe environment and to the unknowing. And so I do have a passion around education because I always felt like that if people know better, they can do better. And so we had a huge marketing campaign in South Carolina. It was huge. And we started with the customers, and then we went to the elected officials, state and federal, Lindsey Graham's office, Tim Scott, and then from there we went to the pilots and the owners, right? Because there's a lot of trust. If you're a Mike pilot for a corporate operation, and you and I have been working together for a long, long time, the old saying, the only thing between me and the ground is my pilot.
Yeah.
And so, unknowingly or knowingly, the owners have bought into an airplane, and they're always looking for ways to offset some of their cost. It's going up for everybody. So as a good pilot, I'm going to say, hey, well, we could do some dry leasing if you'd like to. You got 3 or 4 buddies. We could set up a LLC. We'll put everybody in their own LLC, and I'll manage it for you. And we'll offset your cost. We'll have you flying for free. Well, there's a lot of fallacies to that. And so it starts to go off the skids, and I've seen, and I'm not exaggerating this case is closed now, but there was companies out there that had well over 100 dry leases. And it's just, and then it becomes just the cost of doing business, because I will say that, once I start an investigation, it can take up to 5 years to do, just to work its way through the system. And, everybody's innocent until proven guilty. And rightfully so. And so the burden of proof is always on the FAA in any investigation. The burden of proof is on the federal government to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. And that's very time consuming, and sometimes we don't have the tools, and more important, lately they don't have the resources to do some of these investigations, because it is massively undertaking.
Well, and if I can add into, Randy, what you're saying is one thing that Randy and I've been working on is what changes can we advocate for within the different agencies. So because the FAA, they can investigate, as Randy did. He went out and investigated, but it's hard. They're not always working with the DOJ, Department of Justice, and the FAA doesn't hold police power. And so we're looking at how can what different avenues. I don't want to say that because we're still working on it, so it hasn't actually happened yet. But if it was my ideal world, I would love for illegal charter to become a crime, like a felony and stuff. Right. I think that would immediately put a stop to it. Not just the penalties, not just fines. Obviously, those are important, but also, and I know that it does get put in some NTSB reports, but we've spoken with members of the NTSB on, if there's an accident and it was under an illegal charter, that should be in there. We need to be getting awareness around these, because as Randy had mentioned as well, a lot of times the customers have no idea that they're on an illegal charter. We have one member that tells the story of they had 6 larger gentlemen wanted to go on a hunting trip, and they went to the member and said, how much is this going to be? And they said, well, due to the weight of the aircraft and these larger gentlemen on the aircraft, they were going to have to do a fuel stop. And these gentlemen didn't want to do a fuel stop. They wanted to go. They went down the road to an operator that was doing illegal operations, and they quoted them cheaper and didn't have the fuel stop because they weren't meeting the safety requirements of 135 operations. Customers don't know that. They just think they're getting a better service, thinking, oh, it's cheaper and I don't have to the fuel stop. Okay, but getting the word to the customers has also been key, but then working with the agencies, and Randy's been key in how we go about and think creatively to combat illegal charter.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're recommending in the last case that I closed out was, at a certain level, it gets turned over to the Department of Justice. And one of the questions they asked me, why did you offer this settlement for this amount? Because we could have got this amount. And I'm like, well, I don't set that price, right? And so what we found was, through working with the Department of Justice, is that there's a lot of inconsistency across the organization from FAA attorneys. Now, in their defense, illegal charters or whatnot is not the only cases that they work. I mean, the average workload for an attorney could be over 150 cases. It's anything in the Department of Transportation. So they service many lines of business, and that's why the process takes years to get through. So one of the things that we recommended is that before the flight standards or the FAA offers a settlement, work with the Department of Justice to see, more consistency across the organization, because the settlement offers were so different, I would say.
Now, just for the listeners that are, I'll go back to that, maybe aren't in aviation, and you guys correct me because you're the experts here if I'm wrong, to synopsis kind of an illegal charter. So the average person who flies, right, they fly on a 121 scheduled airline. You're getting on Spirit, United, whoever it might be. You buy a ticket at a predetermined time. You go from O'Hare to Orlando, go to Disney World, go to Mickey, do your thing. I think the general population understands that. Now, a charter itself, so if you're like a 135 on-demand aircraft, you're paying for that aircraft to take you from point A to point B on your schedule. So as a user, you're putting your money forward and saying, yeah, I want to hire you to fly me to here.
Yes.
And when that happens, what we're really saying here is there are certain operators out there that aren't following, probably Randy, to your job when you were with the FAA, the rules that are established to fly that route for things like the pilot hours, medical certificates, that they have their type certificated in that aircraft. Is that can you take that, elaborate, or is that kind of, did I miss something?
I mean, you can go to, and this is the truth. I'm not trying to be funny, but you can find it on Pinterest. You can find them on Craigslist, pilot and plane.
Facebook groups. That's when we saw yesterday come up. We had 3 on Facebook groups, and it is also an operator that doesn't have the air operator certificate that they need to have. That's like one of the key pieces is, like, Randy mentioned earlier, the certification timeline to get your certificate. These people have not gone through that.
Okay.
The 135 certificate timeline, making sure that they have the safety, the pilot hours. And yeah, as Randy said, you can find it on. Randy, I'm surprised you know about Pinterest. I'm impressed. This is what happens when you just
part of investigation, when you catch somebody doing this, and the person that's chartered, or let me say that the person that paid for the flight, unknowingly or knowingly, social media is a great tool, because everywhere anybody goes, there's a selfie, right?
Right.
So I always develop the timelines based off the passengers.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I would assume your Pinterest is probably filled with old grandfather clocks and potentially some farm field. But so, how rampant is this, would you say, in your guys' expert opinion? I guess me, not completely understanding the deep dive that you guys, obviously, because it's your day job, you've done it. I would assume, being in this industry, my orbit of it, that it's more rampant outside of the United States and probably countries that have less regulations, or quite honestly, maybe it's not even a legal charter in certain countries because of their own regulations. But what do you, when you look at this and you say, yeah, this is one of our hot topic issues, how often do you think this is happening?
All the time.
All the time.
I mean, yesterday we had an operator that came to us that reported just 3 out of 1 airport that they saw. And they knew that, what they were doing, and then they're reporting it. But then it's, sometimes there is frustration because there's not always follow-up, so they don't know if those are getting investigated. But, I mean, we have a joke between, the 135 guys, and they're like, well, why don't I just operate illegally? Now, they won't, which is good. They're doing it the right way. But, I mean, it happens across the country, daily basis. Randy, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
I will tell you the first year, I'll tell you how rampant it is. And that was just in my great state. We opened up over 40 investigations the first year. And we reported and undertook so much that the FAA had to create a tiger team attorneys that would only deal with those cases across the United States, because the more we caught, the more we educated, and then we were training other offices to do these investigations, and it just, it went way up. So I mean, I would say it's rampant.
That's it. Yeah. Is this when you guys look at your mission, and I don't know when you both came in, because Randy, I would assume your past experience is probably invaluable to what your mission is with NATA on this. Is this your primary kind of target as you guys are formulating? I know you mentioned a little bit of you sat down with Kirk Costanza, right, the head of your organization, and talked about what NATA's looking at. Is this kind of the primary target right now for you?
So I'd say that this is a huge area that we're looking at. It's a little difficult because it's not something that NATA can just solve right then.
Right.
If I could, snap my fingers, have no more illegal operations, that would be key. It's definitely an area that we are advocating for. And, that's one of the areas that we see impacting. It's causing 135 operators to have a commercial disadvantage when they have others that are operating, not having to follow the regulations, not having the cost of those. And so it's absolutely a key area. I don't know that I'd say it's the number one, because there's a lot of number ones,
Sure.
A lot of priorities right now. But as we grow, and as we grow our 135 membership base, as Randy mentioned, that we've been working on, having those voices going, we just had our day on the Hill and our Air Charter Summit, going and explaining to the elected officials, whether it be at a state level, a federal level, why this is so key, and the safety of their constituents in the back of the plane, and why they need to be on a actual legal charter, has been a key aspect of that. And the more voices we get, the better. I know some states are working on bills to combat illegal charter, but it'd be great to be able to have even more at a national level.
And another big thing is the FET tax. The federal government and the charter operator, well, again, we go back to everybody's got their hand in your pocket, feels like, and so when you have people flying 2,000 or 3,000 flights a year as uncertified charters, they're not meeting their obligations under the federal guidelines for taxes like everybody else. So that's a huge opportunity for the federal government and the IRS. As much as I don't like being taxed, I want to be taxed fairly and have some equality across the board.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you look at a 135 operator, they're over the last few years, their insurance premiums have gone up as much as 20%. They're paying federal excise taxes, takeoff and landing fees. And so, you look at equality across the board, and then you start looking into the cost not to do it right? The money is the driving factor. And then when people get caught, it's just the cost of doing business. And this is a true story. This is a true story that it made me cry. And there was a young man that was flying a Phenom, and he invited a guy to come along with him for windshield time. And they were carrying 3 passengers, 2 brothers, and his assistant, out of a local airport in South Carolina. Took off in IFR conditions. And they had been having some instrumentation problems. Well, the pilot shut down power, powered off. And it took 30 minutes for that to repower, right, in flight, and in IFR conditions. And so they were flying 180 degrees out in IFR conditions, and the passengers in the back, none the wiser. And I'm not making this up. I have the signed statement. The only way they made it back to the airport was by the young man's, the passenger who was along for the windshield time. His iPhone had a compass on it.
Really? Wow. Wow.
That's a true story. And they landed so hard, that it was a hard landing. But, we sent inspectors out there at the time, but we didn't have, and I'm being honest, the inspectors didn't have the experience or the wherewithal. They knew as passengers, knew it was pilot, but they didn't know at the time that it was illegal charter.
Yeah.
And the guy that was in the right seat got out, he fell down to the ground and kissed the ground because he thought he was going to die.
Wow.
And that is a true story. You should have him on one day and let him tell you that story, because it moved me. And but those two brothers and that assistant got back on that plane later that day and flew with that same person.
Such a powerful story both ways. Powerful to begin with, and then human nature to, I guess.
People interviewing people and looking at flight data and listening to air traffic tapes, of any fatal accident. It's just nothing that I want to have to go through again. But people don't realize how many times they've almost died.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've had people that folks tell me who are very, very wealthy, and they've parked their $200,000 Mercedes in the hangar, got the car seats in it. They'll park that car in their garage while they're gone, but they'll get on a plane. They have no idea who the pilot is, or some friend of a friend of a friend. Put their kids in it, and they told me I just go up the ladder, turn left, and sit down in the left seat and want my drink. And the attitude around that, maybe they just don't know or just don't care. I don't know what it is, and it was alarming for me to see that, and but it happens. I can take you to any airport, anywhere, anytime.
Yeah, no.
Find you what you need.
I mean, it goes drive home that I'm glad there's people like both of you looking out to make it better. And I know here I've heard from some people that are working through the process to fly 135, and I don't know, Jenny, Randy, you may know. What I had been told is the process to go through the certification for that used to be regionally set, and then it moved to DC, and now operators are waiting months, if not years, to get to the process where.
I mean, that is a subject that is near and dear to my heart.
Okay.
Because we did a lot of certifications, and I will tell you that the FAA, as you know, have lost a tremendous amount of resources through no fault of their own.
Sure.
And certifications, it's a huge process for an inspector, because what an inspector has assigned to them is certificate management. And as a principal operations inspector, if you were an operations inspector, you may have 10 or 12 135 certificates assigned to you, 10 141 flight schools, right? 15 designated pilot examiners, 137 operators, 133 operators. And so you're trying to manage all that on-demand work from the flying public, which is not certificate related. Then you've got your certificate management work. And oh, by the way, I want you to do a certification. But there's only one of me. So it's about workflow. And yes, the process can be extremely cumbersome and painful for both parties. And I know the FAA is underway to work with folks to help streamline that process, but I'll say a lot of times the applicant may or may not have shown up ready when the bell rang, right?
That's
when you ring the bell, you got to be ready. but it does take too long. So 2 years to get a 135 generally. I guess that's the wait list for, depending on how complicated the certificate is or the operation they want. And I always tell people, if you want to get a certificate, start out easiest the way you can, which would be simple. And then ice the cake as you go along. Start adding more operation specifications. Start adding locations. Don't start out asking for the worldwide, Caribbean, start out simple, and the process should go a whole lot quicker. And then you, as you get your certificate, you can start earning revenue, and then you start building and layering your operations through effective communication, because now you are a certificate holder. And when I was in charge of an office, my mandate was to take care of existing operators first, because they're already got employees, they're already paying taxes, they're in business. On-demand work from the flying public, such as, and a lot of people don't realize this, but ferry permits, balloons, flyovers, incidents, accidents come first, fatalities. That's all secondary work that comes in every single day. It never stops. And pretty soon you're just drowning because your priorities are changing every day. In all fairness to the inspectors, I think they're doing the best they can. And I know the operators sometimes forget that they're not the only 135 operator in the state, and there are a multitude of many. And so one of the things that I recommend is have that how goes it meeting with the office manager, because I set those up with my larger operators every month, and it was mandatory that my crew was on there, the inspection team and the supervisors, and then their 119s or director of ops maintenance and the president if needed. And that way we always had an effective line of communication, transparency. We knew what was coming, it was documented. There was never any surprises, and that helped, alleviate some of the pain points. But it is a long process, and I wished I could change it. We're trying to change it. The FAA is trying to change it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've been working on some things too. Like, I know that there was some language also put in the FAA reauthorization on certification, but there's other things coming about that might help within this process. The ODA, the Organizational Designation Authorization. I think I got that right, Randy. That's
Yeah,
a hard
you
one
did.
to say.
Which I'm a big proponent of that, and that's the Organizational Designee Authority, much like a designated pilot examiner or a designated airworthiness rep. An ODA is an organization, and just to be clear, an ODA or designees do not take away an inspector's job because they are congressionally mandated there for safety. That's not going to change. And we're never going to be or the FAA will never be a pay-for-fee service, like some countries. So the designees and the organizational designees offer industry an avenue to get things done in a more expeditious manner. So would I be willing to pay instead of waiting 2 years? Probably, because when you're done, you're going to be done.
And so we've advocated in that manner to get more where the tasks that can be given to ODAs within 135 can be expanded. That was something that we submitted beginning of this year. I think all the months tend to blend together in that capacity. But, we've, as Randy also mentioned, is that you need to be ready, and there's different steps, that you need to have. And so NATA has worked within our Partner Plus program to get, different companies that may help write manuals or may help with different operational requirements to get those and help ensure that when they're applying. So that's one of our biggest things. Make sure you have your stuff together when you're applying. Utilize these resources so that you're not, we can't necessarily speed up the timeline, even though we're working on it, but that will help you so that you're not getting more and more delays.
Yeah, and one last thing that I want to add to that, you've been out to dinner or out when we were younger, and they'd say, be nice, tip your waiters and waitresses, right? So be nice to your local FSDO, and I'll give you an example of this. Jenny Ann has an airplane, and every year she calls the FSDO and needs a ferry permit to go to Sun and Fun. you're out of annual. Annual's keyword. You got 12 months to get that annual done, right? So you really have to look at your resources. So I've had a year. Jenny's had a year to plan to get her annual done. But she loves whoever does it up at this location. And in all fairness to everybody else, is that really a good emergency? And you get mad because we can't give you a ferry permit, but you've had a year to plan for this.
Let's also preface, though, Randy, that this is a hypothetical situation.
I was just going to add, Jenny,
because we all know I would have my stuff in way before that.
But my point is that on-demand work. Yeah. You know, so be cognizant of that as industry, because the FAA we tried really hard to take care of everybody, and people would get mad when I would tell them I can't give you. You're going to have to get a designee to do this. Well, that's going to cost me $1,500, and I pay taxes, and that's my right. Well, yes, sir, it is. I can't argue that.
Yeah,
but resources is an issue, and what is the higher risk?
Right. No, I mean, I'm really wondering why Jenny has to go to Sun and Fun so much, and with her legal charter, I'm kidding. I think we've established that was just an example using Jenny's name. Yeah. Do you actually?
I laugh because I do not camp, and I heard a lot of people at Sun and Fun, or no, I guess that's Oshkosh Camp, and I was like, oh yeah, my idea of camping is going to the Four Seasons and opening the windows. So fair. I was like, nah. That's why I also started laughing when Randy said that, because I was like, yeah, I'm probably not the best example, to use.
No, but the point of that whole thing is, talking about designees and ODAs, and, that's one of the things that the FAA is getting better at. I mean, I don't know that we need more pilot designated examiners. We just need better utilization of them, because they're not, in my opinion, not being utilized equally across the geographic boundaries. And ODA expansion, ODA is already out there, parts manufacturing, airworthiness. They're looking at expanding the airman certification, which would be a huge support avenue for industry, and there are even talks of allowing certifications to be done if that's what you choose to do.
Yeah.
At some point, I don't know where they're at with that. I'm not privy to that information, but I like the option. I like the option.
Do you actually fly, Jenny? Are you a pilot?
I do not. I don't know if I should say this on a recording, but although I would love to, I'm not a great. I don't know. I get distracted easily, so I'm a good passenger princess, I think, as they call it. I get on the plane, and when the second I get on the plane, I'm asleep like that. I'm so lucky that I am able to fall asleep the second I get on a plane. But I don't think many people want their pilots falling asleep the second they get on the plane. And so I did actually sign up at one point to get my private pilot's license. I decided that for the safety of the national airspace, probably would be best that I stick operationally wise. But I do love, I've actually had some of our members offer to bring me to their in-dock training, so I can see what the pilots go through. I'm going to be going out in a few weeks to one of our members that's in Smyrna, Tennessee, and going through their 145, seeing how they run on a daily basis and stuff. So while I may not fly, I like to learn it all. I actually have thought about just doing ground school just to understand it more. And I do actually have, it's expired, but my Part 107 drone license, but I wasn't great at flying that either. So I did try to fly it in the law office one time because I was in DC airspace, which you could not fly a drone in DC airspace. So I flew it in the office. And sorry, Cousin O'Connor, I think a couple of those walls are dented, but it wasn't just me, it was the other attorneys too. So
that's great.
There was one question that you asked earlier is the illegal charter, is that our primary?
Yes.
No, it's not. And really, Jenny and I, we host our staff two committees, Air Charter Committee and then the Maintenance Committee. And so if they're having issues or concerns in the field at different parts of the United States, we take those concerns in, we track them, we document them, and then we go to the appropriate line of business within flight standards or the FAA policy, regulatory branch, airman branch, designee branch, whatever it is. And we're the go-between for that, and we help resolve those. And in fact, Jenny and I are working on an info share with policy regarding drug and alcohol testing and some hydrostatic bottle testing that some are saying needs to be done or not done. And so we're the mediators between that and the highway.
Well, and Randy, you mentioned a good aspect that I did want to mention to you, Jeff, and I don't know, and you can feel free to use this as well since you're in NATA member, but one thing within regulatory is that our members come to us with different issues. Every day it's a different one, but it's where they might not have been able to get help on a different capacity, or they want our opinions in solving, how do we get something from the FAA HQ, because maybe one inspector saying one thing and one FSDO and another one. And so that's something that NATA members should realize that they can take advantage of. It's a huge benefit to being a NATA member is us attempting. I can't promise I'm going to solve all the issues, but, and then also when we're getting those issues, it allows us to see what the operators are facing or what the airports are facing. So then we can help use that on a broader scale to do the advocacy efforts. So we don't just do it. We love our committee members. We're very appreciative of our committee members. It's really great right now because we also have all different size and different operations, and we also have medical operations. And it's really nice to see the broad spectrum of that. And that's one of the things as we look to grow our membership. It's not that we're just looking at large operators or small operators, really across the bandwidth and with the different airports and FBOs that they work with as well, because the more that they can work together. And plus, I think everyone likes coming to our events so they can go have a beer with the others in the aviation ecosystem.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so much that you can learn just from networking. I mean, being in this now, like I said, for a couple of decades plus, a lot of times I say to people, it's I don't want to say it's rare you go to a session and not learn something, but I learned so much more at networking, talking to people like you to understand what that actually what did they experience it? Did they have a little different with whether it's the ADO, whether it's the FSDO, in the airport side of the world, we work with the airport district's office a lot. And each one looks at things a little bit differently. And so just talking to people like you, there's so much value in that, because it kind of can give, like me, so many times in my life, a roadmap to say, oh, I hadn't thought about it, that way. And also, even in this conversation, when operators come to me and say, hey, we've been working to try to get our certificate, but this is why. And so like the way you describe it, Randy, helps my edification to articulate a better response, because a lot of times people come to the airport sponsor to ask questions, right? And it may not be our wheelhouse, but we love to connect them to people like you that actually can understand where the processes are at. So I love that thought.
Yeah. So what Jenny and I are working on, rolling out a meet and greet and talk to current members in person, and we invite in potential new members. And this is not a membership drive. This is a collective voice drive, because it needs to be stronger. It needs to be more consistent. And, Jenny and I are on the tip of the spear for that. And I think both of us have enough passion. And we use folks like you who are members who see value in that. And then you also see value in giving us feedback, right, to get better.
Yeah.
Because if we're continually talking from the top down, nothing changes. And then you're just being talked to.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is listen to you and then articulate your message up to the people that need to hear it in a manner that makes effective change for the collective good.
Well, and I'll say that also one thing on Randy's thing, and I just want to put a plug in. One of the locations we're looking at is within Chicago, because one of our 135 operators has offered to host this. They see so much value in this. So when we're out there, we're definitely going to invite you to come to this. It's a free event and stuff, and it's just, we haven't set the date for it yet, but free event, like as we said, to get the voices, like that's our biggest concern. And so I just wanted to plug Chicago, since I know that's where you're at.
I'm assuming, Jenny, you're planning that in the middle of winter, correct? That's when you want to come.
Actually, it might end up being like that.
Oh,
okay.
Your
goodness, you'll see me in like a parka. I mean, come on, I went from Dubai, Tennessee, now up to Chicago. It's gonna be, I won't be taking my parka off the whole time I'm there in the winter, but no, I do think it'll be good, because that's the other thing, is different locations across the country face different aspects. I'm actually speaking at NATA's conference in Alaska. Alaska operators face a lot different challenges and risks than, maybe those that are operating in Florida. And Florida faces, the Florida airports face something different than the Chicago airports. And so getting the voices across the country, we don't want to only be hearing from one segment or one region. And so that's why I think it's important, Jeff, that we're going to be coming up to Chicago to see y'all and see the operators there. And even if it's in winter, I'll do it. It's fun. I love our members that much. It's fun.
Well, we appreciate that.
And one thing that I want to add, when we're listening to people, it's, we hear a lot, well, the FAA sucks, that's not necessarily productive. Right. And then you have this contentious relationship, and you need each other.
Right.
And it's really about having an understanding of what's going on inside an office and knowing the team. And because I can't fix, well, they suck. I can't fix that. I can't be a part of,
Right.
So let's pull back to idle. And let's look for productive ways that we can create transparency, effective communication. Now, it might not always be to the one or the other's liking all the time, but at least I know where you stand, and you're being honest with me and transparent with me, and you're validating what you're saying both ways, right? And then that builds trust.
Well, bringing them in, Randy, too, like to our meetings, like that's one thing we've really appreciated. We had the NTSB, TSA, and the FAA at our recent event, and they really like being able to get out and hear it too, and that creates better relationships. So we'll be inviting I don't want to guarantee that agencies will be at it. We might have a, industry-only session where they can talk and say things like what Randy said, but we love our FAA. I do have to preface that. Then letting them come in and hear and having that dialogue has been one of the, I would say, unique aspects that NATA offers.
Yeah, I think one of the things in our industry, right, is you do hear, I think, Randy, to your points, there's some times there's comments that are made that are not productive. And, I think probably very valuable that you were in that organization, and now, you can advocate for it, because there is, at the end of the day, and I say this about our airport district's office a lot, because there's days where, this is a podcast, so it's not visual, but people know what I look like. I used to have hair before getting into aviation, and sometimes you're like, you just want to rip out what you have left. But the reality is, people are, there's a lot going on all the time, and we're all human beings, and we're all working for the same goal. And when you talk to someone, whether they're with the FAA or they're with another airport or they're an operator, we're all working for the same common goal, usually, right? A safe, effective, efficient operation. And so I love the passion that you guys have for the industry, and I love what you're doing, because quite honestly, for the listeners, right, the jobs that you're doing, and people get in a plane, right, and I hear this all the time when we go to the high schools, and, I want to be the pilot, and I want to fly the plane, and that's what you see, and that is a really cool job, and I love that people want to do that, but there's so much of this background work that you guys do that keep everything operating effectively, efficiently, and safe overall. It's the safest mode of travel. And so, building off of that, we have such an amazing foundation, but it takes people like you, and a lot of times, behind the scenes, and people don't necessarily get to thank you for that. So I will thank you for that. And it's just, you do your job so well, effectively, that they kind of know you don't exist a lot of the times, and unfortunately, when people do know you exist, something went wrong. So I love all the advocacy you're doing to keep people traveling safe. And I know I've kept you very long today, and I appreciate you entertaining me because it has been so interesting to me. I've learned so much. Is there anything that I haven't asked, or anything that you want to say to the listeners, both that are in aviation or that aren't, that maybe we haven't discussed, or a plug-in for anything that you guys haven't done yet? Because again, it seems like we've hit a lot of really good stuff. You're doing a lot of amazing things, but I want to leave you an open mic to say anything maybe that I've missed.
Well, and I was just going to say, feel free to add me on LinkedIn. It's under Jenny Ann Urban. I try to post a lot of stuff that's going on within the industry, supportive not only, of course, I'm posting NATA stuff, but just things to be aware of. And as I mentioned, we are looking at international aspects as well. But if there is any operators, whether a member or not a member, that is currently having, operations to the Middle East, and they might need some guidance in navigating some of the challenges at the moment, That's something I've been helping on the last week or so. And so those are different areas that you might not be thinking about, but that if your listeners are doing that, if they have questions about NATA, we would, love to answer anything, but continuing to have this dialogue, and we really appreciate it. But now, Jeff, you got to get back to Nashville so you can try Kid Rock's new restaurant with me. I haven't gotten the chance, but I know that you love the other one. So I was like, you got to get back out to Nashville so that we can go there.
That would be fun. The first time, I guess the only time I actually really met you in person was there, and we got to know each other a little bit at Kid Rock's bar, which I wouldn't have expected all the 1980s tunes, especially like Aha. It didn't seem like that would have been the environment for that, but it was a really nice place. So, and I know you've mentioned some other restaurants on the strip there. So, one, you guys put on an amazing event. It was an official event with NATA there, and that was awesome. I learned a lot. But again, the networking and getting to learn you, and then today, Randy, getting to meet you and your background, I feel confident that NATA has the right team in place.
Well, we're trying, and you just got to believe sometimes that you can make a difference, and that's what I believe that we're doing. And I believe, listen, I cannot say anymore how deeply passionate I am for what we do and for what we're doing for industry, but it takes a village.
It does.
And I'll say you'll have a good time if you come to hang out. I guess you can tell Randy and I have a lot of fun working together, even if it might be a really challenging day, but if you come, engage with NATA, engage with the team, you'll tend to at least be smiling, hopefully, when you leave. We try to make sure that it's an enjoyable environment, whether it's at our events or just, helping solve issues and really looking for the positive side of things.
Well, and absolutely. I love that. I mean, as someone from the outside with NATA, honestly, I mean, we're a member here, but more over the last year, I've gone to more of your conferences, and Kurt has been, awesome and inviting, and, me not knowing as many people there, sit at our table, and you've done the same thing, Jenny, and I don't know you as well, Randy, but I can tell from this conversation you probably do the same thing. And, a lot of times if you're new to one of these organizations, it's hard. I don't want to say it's like high school, right? But you're like, well, what table do I sit at? Who do I talk to? And you were always so welcoming to me, one, in my day job. So anybody that's in the industry that's not maybe a part of NATA or hasn't gotten in, I would highly recommend, because you guys do. And honestly, it's kind of like conversations like this, which, again, is why I'm so happy you came on the podcast, because I do think, sometimes in our industry, you lose that kind of human quality of conversation, and it's very robotic, and we talk a lot about rules and regulations. And if you can add some of the perspective that both of you did to this, then people are like, oh, Randy's a human, and Jenny's a human, and I'm a human, and this is great. I understand what you're saying now, and I understand what you're getting, and some of the frustrations that we all go through in the industry. And it's such, for me, I think it's such a better approach, because you get people to open up, and they'll be honest about their frustrations and what they're going through, and at the end of the day, we just end up with a better, safer system. So kudos to both you guys for what you're doing over there. Thank you again so much for being on the podcast. I really, truly appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having us, and thanks for being a NATA member as well.
Thank you.
Get the word out, brother.
I will. Well, another stimulating conversation for us here on Destination Aviation. We also have some really good interviews coming up in the near future. So for you, those of you in these states that are celebrating the 4th of July, I just counted my fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yep, they're all there. So on our next episode, we'll check back in and make sure we have 10 digits on our hands. The next episode that will drop will be quite interesting. I get interviewed myself from one of our students. We'll get into that episode when it gets here, but a student from North Dakota. So North Dakota, Illinois puts me in the hot seat for some questions, so that should be a pretty good episode. Looking forward to it. I will be traveling on vacation for the next week and a half to Petoskey, Michigan. If you're in the area, shoot me a message on the email. We'll give you a podcast sticker. And I hope everybody, their travels are safe. I know I saw from the TSA reports that it's going to be very, very busy out there. And just the overall travel. So be safe and enjoy listening to Destination Aviation to your destination. If you like the podcast, tell a friend. If you hated it, tell 3 or 4 enemies. Thank you, everybody. Until next time, I'll see you down the runway.